abroad opportunities that we have on this campus.
Good afternoon. All right, so I'm here to tell you about an amazing opportunity that we have here on our campus, an opportunity for education and transformation. Who's in? Thank you. All right, we have 2 study abroad courses being offered in the spring semester. You can choose to study intercultural communication or international project management. Both courses meet throughout the semester, and they have a 1-week travel abroad. We do travel together, both classes. So if you're at all interested in a study abroad experience, this is the perfect time to do it. And I have a link to the online app that you would need to enroll. So if you're interested, hit me up. Now back to the amazing opportunity for transformation. I've done a little bit of study abroad with the Guzecs and Troy Brockway since 2007. Yes, Troy Brockway. And I am amazed each and every time the difference that 1 week makes when students have that opportunity to travel. From the time we leave Salina, Kansas to the time we get back, it's just amazing to watch. I felt it the first time I got to travel abroad, and it's so much fun to share that experience with students. So the faculty members involved in this program are the Guzecs, give them a wave, Troy Brockway, Becky DeGrief, there she is, Miss Beck. And we would love for you to be a part of this. So if you're at all interested, have questions, hit any of us up, and we would love to talk with you about it. But it's such an educational and transformational experience.
If you do have the option to study abroad while in college, I would highly recommend it. Last summer, I did spend about 7 weeks in Japan, and I studied Japanese language and Intro to Asian History and Culture for my human development prerequisites through the K-State 8. And it's one thing to study a culture that's completely different than your own, and it's another thing to live in a country where they don't speak your language and they don't eat your food and you are the 0.5% minority. And it's something that is totally different because, yeah, they still had McDonald's, but they were really expensive, for one. And two, they didn't have a lot of them. After the first week, I decided I wouldn't eat American food because, I'm in a different culture, I'm in a different country. I'm going to try to do it their way, the age-old win in Rome, do as the Romans win in Japan, eat like Japanese people. And I really like rice. I love white rice. But after a week of eating rice for breakfast, eating rice for lunch, eating rice for dinner, and then eating rice for snack, at night, I was done with rice. I didn't think I was going to make it. I wanted to come home. I wanted my cereal. I wanted my oatmeal. I wanted cheese because they didn't have cheese or root beer. I was like, this is a staple. So after the first week, I'm like, okay, I've got to find either I've got to go home, which I can't do because I'd have to buy a whole new plane ticket, and I've already paid for this whole, semester in this course. I've got to find some other alternative. I can't really afford to eat American food. It's really expensive here. And then I thought, what does Japan have that I would like? Noodles. Oh, they've got noodles. And so they've got ramen, and I had udon, and I had somen, and, I ate noodles the whole second week. I still had rice because they give you rice with just about everything. But I ate more noodles that week than I've ever eaten in my life. And at the end of the second week, oh my goodness, I didn't want to look at noodles. I was done with noodles. So I went back to rice. And after about 2 weeks, my diet was adjusted, and I got used to, eating rice and noodles every day, maybe not having the same meat. It was great that they had seafood. You could get fresh seafood. I love seafood. I unfortunately live in the state that's farthest away from the ocean and all seafood, But the seafood there was great. Also, learning a new language, learning to be able to communicate with, just 300 words, and having meaningful relationships and friendships with other classmates, with other people that were studying abroad. It not only builds your worldview, and it not only does it help you to realize that we may have different cultures, we may have different political views, but all of us are human. Just about everybody there had the same dreams, fears as Americans, is what we do as home. Everybody wants to have a family and grow up and be successful or fairly successful, and they want to have a job where they feel fulfilled, and it's not much different there. Now the food is different, and some of the social norms are different, but it really does emphasize and show that we're all human. And if you can have that experience while in college, where it's kind of more of a safe place to experience some of those things rather than in the workforce where you kind of got to learn all this, and then they send you to a different country, or you have to meet with a representative from a country, and it's a big deal. And if you make a mistake and you offend them, well, you kind of messed up the whole huge deal for your company. Well, in college, it's a little more laid back. It's a little more, you're allowed to grow and make mistakes as you can, and hopefully get used to the food after 2 weeks or before. So without further ado, I would like to present Engineers Without Borders. We have Kirsten Jones and Emily Workman. They're going to be talking about their endeavors, not only in the state of Kansas and their local community, but also the work that their organization and student chapter has been doing in Guatemala. Thank you.
Hello, is this working? Are these on? Can you hear me? Is that better? Okay. Yeah. It's the bottom button here.
Sweet. Okay.
All right, awesome. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Kristen. I'm a senior studying civil environmental engineering at Kansas State Manhattan campus. I joined the Engineers Without Borders team last fall, so I've been around for a little over a year. I was working on the international team, and then I ran for the international project manager for the following spring, so I guess spring of 2017. Got the position, and I've been doing it ever since. And I also have the role of the Kansas State representative for the regional steering committee, which is something I actually just accepted this past weekend, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit more in the coming slides.
I'm Emily. I'm a sophomore in construction science. I actually joined last fall as well, and I spent the whole year as a general member my freshman year. So I worked with the fundraising committee and with the domestic projects committee, and I got to work really closely with their leaders, and I thought it was really awesome, so I wanted to do that as well. I ran, and now I'm our domestic projects lead. So that just means I pick our domestic projects and I help lead them. So we want to tell you a little bit about an overview of EWB, what we do, and our mission. So Engineers Without Borders USA aims to build a better world through engineering projects that empower communities to meet their basic human needs and equip leaders to solve the world's most pressing challenges.
And our vision is a world in which every community has the capacity to sustainably meet their basic human needs. So what this is basically saying is that EWB has both local and international projects, and EWB is really bottom-up driven, so empowering local communities. This starts where communities identify their own projects and challenges, and they'll partner up with a chapter in the United States, and this will be a 5-year commitment, and so we're actually in our 3rd year of this partnership with our community in Guatemala. And we really focus on making sure that they feel a sense of ownership in the project, so involving them in the design process, keeping in communication with different local leaders, and just making sure that they really want us there and are really happy about what we're doing.
Yeah, I think a really important part about the mission statement is the equip leaders part. At a first glance, that looks like it probably means like student members or professional members, But I think it really means more that we want to equip leaders in the communities that we're working with. We want them to sustainably keep up with the technologies that we put there, and we want them to be able to lead their communities.
We also want to talk a little bit about the general hierarchy of EWB. So I like to think that it starts with the chapters. So there's student and professional chapters alike. So obviously we're part of the student chapter at K-State. And there's also the regional steering committees in the different regions of the United States. And so these steering committees are really committed to being a liaison between the national headquarters and then the individual chapters. And so as a state representative, I would communicate with all the chapters in K-State or in the state of Kansas, help them with different challenges they might have, hear their maybe criticisms or questions. And also, if chapters want to start up, I would be their point of contact. So if you guys want a chapter at this campus, let me know, and we'll work on it. And then there's also standing content committees for things like energy, sanitation, water. They really provide the technical support we need to really get our projects up to the engineering in the United States level caliber. And we've had a lot of success working with them. We recently had a conference call, and we were kind of talking about the different ideas we had and the challenges we were facing. And we mentioned how we're trying to create this compost box and talking about, what we were doing to design for it. And one of them asked, like, did you ask the community if that's what they want? Are they, is this something that happens a lot in this area? And it wasn't something we'd considered, and so we really had to step back and reevaluate before we continued on with our design. There's also, I'll let Emily talk about the...
So there's also separate organizations that work with EWB. So that's Community Engineering Corps and then Engineering Service Corps. So Community Engineering Corps, they're an organization that finds projects and finds that need here in the United States and then allocates them to organizations like Engineers Without Borders and Engineering Service Corps, which is kind of like the Peace Corps, but it's a group of engineers that fix problems in the United States.
And there are also international offices. So right now there are 3. They're working on creating more, and we have the good fortune of having one in Guatemala. And so they provide on-the-ground support, whether that be like technical advice, just information about their kind of social norms, things like that. And so it's been really great working with them on that. And there's also headquarters, and so those are kind of going to be all the people that you see on the EWB website, like the executive director, the different communications representatives, and the program engineers. And every program engineer has about 120 projects, so I'm really fortunate when they get to spend their time approving our individual paperwork and working with our chapter.
Yeah, so our chapter is really fortunate to work here in the United States. We have 4 different projects going on. We have the Urban Farming Guys Project, Habitat for Humanity, Manhattan Emergency Shelter Incorporated, and a new one that we're starting, the Smitty Food Pantry. So first I'm going to talk to you guys about Urban Farming Guys. So they're located in Kansas City, and they're a community development organization. They're a 501c, so that basically means that their leaders only skim off as little as possible to survive. They started off as community gardens, so they just try to empower that community by giving them fresh foods, because this area of Kansas City is actually considered a food desert, so that means the nearest grocery store is over 20 miles away. So they had no real way of getting fresh food. They either had to Uber or walk really far to get to a grocery store. So in reality, most of the people in this community and in this area went to the gas station for their food source, which is really absolutely not healthy. So they went into this community and started these gardens, and now they've kind of branched off into after-school programs. So they also do programming classes, woodshop classes, and art classes. They even started this food science class to help teach the kids healthy ways to prepare food. It's been really amazing to work with them because they're so close to my hometown. I grew up in Kansas City, and I had no idea about this need. I didn't know that some people didn't have grocery stores. So it's really developed me as a person to see what people in my own hometown are struggling with and understand how I can help them with my own technical skills. And we also work with Habitat for Humanity and Manhattan Emergency Shelter. So Habitat for Humanity has 3 builds going on in Topeka right now. They're all in 3 different stages, so that's really fun, and 3 different families. And the Manhattan Emergency Shelter is a kind of night-by-night stay. It's an emergency place you can stay for the night or a couple of nights, and they also help you find a sustainable place to live and get back on your feet. So they asked us to help build them shelves and organize their facility. So our team has been using our technical skills to help them with that. And our next one is the mini food pantry. This one's so new that we don't even really have a name for it, But our idea is that we wanted to create a no questions asked food pantry for students that didn't have transportation. So on campus, we did have a food pantry. That one's kind of new as well. But the problem was that students that didn't have access to these needs didn't have transportation as well. So we kind of learned about the need on our own Manhattan campus, and we decided that we wanted to go and help fix this problem. So we got our idea from these grab-and-go book libraries that you guys might have seen, and we would like to do that with like cans and like foods that won't go bad. This one's in the starting stages, but it's also really helped me like with my organizational skills and my leadership skills to try to get this going on and working really closely with our own campus.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our international project in Guatemala. So yes, we have this commitment, this partnership with El Amate, and that's in the Hoyaba region of Guatemala. And so we have 3 projects, kind of past, present, future. So our past project was a school building, and actually you can see this teacher there with all the students. At our last trip, we gave them K-State shirts, and they all put them on. And they had their new supplies that were donated from a local charity. And we also have this latrine project going on, which is from the assessment trip that I went on last January, and we'll actually be implementing it this coming January. So I've sort of seen it come full circle. It's my baby. I've worked really closely with it, so it means a lot to me. And then the retaining wall is our future project. So on this next implementation trip, we'll be also assessing for the retaining wall to make sure it's still a priority project and something that is a necessity in the community. So first, the school building. At the top left, you can see the old structure. It's more of a shack with kind of a tin roof, dirt floors, really just not a productive environment for learning. And we actually found out that a lot of the students were going to the school in the neighboring community, which was called El Infinito, and they had to pass a ravine to get there. And so it was really steep and kind of treacherous seeming. Us like huge Americans tried to do it, and it was really difficult, but the little kids just ran up and down. But the real problem was during the wet season when the water would rise. Some of them couldn't even get to school, and so clearly there's a need for a school in this community. And the bottom right shows their new school building during their festival that they held when they had their grand opening. And that was kind of my first taste of seeing the actual community and seeing that the work that we're doing is directly impacting people, which I got more of a feel for when I actually got to travel. And so this picture is of their current / previous structure. It looks kind of run down on the outside. It's actually not too shabby on the inside. They have porcelain toilets like us, but the real issue was with their disposal system. It was just a pit in the ground, which was not only contaminating the water table, but also would fill up in a couple years. And so after that, they'll have nowhere to use the restroom, which clearly indicates that they don't have proper sanitation in the area. And so this is me from our assessment trip last January. We took both qualitative and quantitative data. So quantitatively, we conducted a topographic survey, and so you can see Chad on the left there with his surveying equipment. Jack and I running around in the background, probably playing soccer or something. And then on the right, we held a meeting with the kids to just talk about sanitation. But beyond that, we met with other community leaders like the Kokode, which is a regional leadership group of 5 people, 4 men, 1 woman. It was really cool to see the female leader there, empowering women in the area. And so we met with them just to hear about their priorities. And we also met with the school teacher and with our local contractor. Another thing we did was we met with the men and the women separately, just because sanitation is a little bit of a touchy subject, and we wanted to make sure that we were getting the most accurate, reliable information. This is actually a really big challenge that I didn't foresee. I've studied Spanish since I was like 5 years old, and I just think of it as kind of translating, but it's more than just translating the language. It's kind of overcoming those social barriers that might prevent you from getting the kind of information that you need. So definitely still working on that, like breaking down those barriers. And then here's some pictures of the kids. Had a lot of fun playing with them, and overall it was a really exciting, rewarding trip. I've always been a little bit apprehensive about international service trips, just because I worry that maybe we're doing it because like we want to, because it's fulfilling for us and maybe not actually necessary for the community. But something that really stood out to me was during our meeting with the Kokode, when the female leader at the very end just expressed how grateful she was for us and how we were directly impacting their community and empowering them to grow. So that made me very emotional and still sticks with me and kind of spurs me on to continue our work on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so working with EWB, it really put our education in perspective. I mean, we're just demoed students. Like, how can we really make any sort of impact on international development? But we've learned how to ask questions, how to work with team, how to be better leaders and better team members. And also, it's teaching us things that we can't learn in the classroom.
I've definitely learned that although technical skills and bachelor's degrees are important, all you really need to affect change is to just be a person that cares and to take the initiative. And so I've definitely grown as a civic leader, communicator, and just I think as a person from being involved with EWB.
Yeah, so thanks for listening to us. You can keep up with what we're doing with our projects on Twitter and Facebook.
Great. And I want to give a special thanks to Jacob Rose, who set this all up and coordinated with us, answered our questions. Really appreciate it, and we really appreciate this opportunity to present to you all.
And next we have Becky Carnes. Next we have Becky Carnes from the Peace Corps. So far we've had people talk about what you can do while you're in school, what you can do as a student, but the Peace Corps is something that is also an option for after school, maybe after you graduate, after you've worked in industry for a little bit. How can you give back to the community? And so, for a round of applause.
Hi, I'm Becky Carnes. Thank you so much for inviting me. This feels really far back, so I'm going to move forward a little bit, but thank you, Jake. Sure. But yes, I highly encourage you, if this is something that you're interested in at all, study abroad, do Engineers Without Borders, take this class, things like that, because that is the kind of experience that Peace Corps is really looking for, or really any international development organization, to be honest. But well-rounded work, but also work where you have actually communicated cross-culturally with people is so valuable. It absolutely changes you more than the communities that you impact. But it'll make you think about your own identity, what your culture even means, right? Who you are, which parts of you are actually you, and which parts of you are your culture, and which parts matter, and which parts you wanna maybe leave, and which parts you wanna take on from other cultures, if that makes sense. So yes, please study abroad, do that kind of thing. Get to know international students. If you can't leave Salina, get to know people from other places, because that's another great way to travel. But yeah, so this is me. I'm Becky. I am also a K-State grad. I did my master's here in 2012. And I studied abroad actually as an undergrad in South Africa. But I was in the Peace Corps in Botswana from 2013 to 2016. So there's Botswana there. It's the Kalahari Desert. It's also the Okavango Delta. So there's a lot of diversity within Botswana. So Peace Corps is an international service opportunity of the US government that sends volunteers abroad into places where we are invited, which is really important to me, to tackle some of the world's most pressing needs. So HIV, AIDS, poverty, hunger. So you can get jobs in almost any major within the Peace Corps. If you look on the website, you'll see there's probably about 200 jobs up there right now. So in the Peace Corps, you actually work for local organizations that invite you. You don't actually work directly for the Peace Corps. So they provide support, training, they pay for you to get there and get back, that kind of thing. But you never work for projects that you come up with or that Peace Corps comes up with, if that makes sense. All projects are locally driven. So you always work for a local boss in a complementary way so that you don't accidentally steal jobs from local people, because that happens sometimes. So me, I have a statistics background. So the Botswana Ministry of Health, that was the local organization, hired me to help local doctors at a district health management team collect data and analyze the data on HIV/AIDS in Botswana. It has one of the highest rates in the world. And so we were trying to find out what are the key drivers of HIV in Botswana and what is working and what hasn't been working in terms of prevention programs over the past, since 2002 really, when the pandemic really took hold. So that's me. Oh, I guess I need my clicker here. So I could tell you a million stories really about how it changed me, but the question really is how it changes communities you work with, the people that you work with by doing this global service. So I want to tell you a story. It's not some amazing project that I did. It's not really even a story about my main job in Peace Corps. But it is one of the best ways that I can answer that question about the impact of service and how service has on local people. So this story, it actually happened near the end of my service, so I'd been in country about 2 years at the time. And it starts with a word and a man. Okay, so I'm going to teach you the word first. This is a Setswana word, Bodira Hatsi. I want to teach it to you, so I really want you guys to say it. Bodira Hatsi. So you roll your R a little bit, and the G is like an H with a little bit of phlegm. Bodira Hatsi. So like bo, deer, hot. See? Yeah, Bodira Hatsi. That's the word. So this is actually one of the most incredible things that I think about immersing yourself in another culture and another language, is that sometimes you stumble across a concept that doesn't translate into English. Bodira Hatsi doesn't have an English translation. And then suddenly your reality is changed, right? Because you're actually thinking in different concepts that you didn't even have before. So this means an expression, so sort of like art, but it could be poetry or dancing or rap or whatever, but an expression of like the most authentic self, but that self is plural, like it's a collective self. Like, so there's a cultural element to it, like we're expressing our culture somehow, but it's this authentic thing. Okay, so that's the word. Now the man, this is Wilson Ngoni. I met him on a bus, actually. When I got on the bus, there was a boy who had been harassing a girl, and Wilson was having a talk with this boy, and he was talking to him about respect and how respecting others is part of respecting yourself, and we're all children of God, and you have to respect women, and he was talking about honor and dignity and all these things, and this boy was like really paying attention, like he was into it. You could tell he was like really kind of in awe of Wilson. So that was my introduction to Wilson. We got talking, realized we lived close to each other, and became really good friends after that. Wilson's an artist, a really good artist, actually. The government of Botswana commissions him to paint for visiting dignitaries. So George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Michelle Obama, and I all have Wilson Ngoni paintings hanging in our houses. Mine's probably smaller than theirs. So that's how I got to know him. And as I got to know him, I discovered that he had a vision. So Wilson considered himself a bad student. There are many educators in here who are like, there's no such thing, right? Like, there are students who maybe need different structure in the classroom, or maybe they need to be stimulated in something that they absolutely love, right? Like those of you who are teachers. Botswana uses the Cambridge system, though, which doesn't really give kids any second chances at all. It really funnels kids out. So Wilson never graduated high school. It funnels kids out who don't meet benchmarks. And so a lot of orphans and vulnerable children, you guys heard that phrase, OVCs, orphans and vulnerable children, of which Botswana has many. In fact, most children in Botswana are considered that just because they're highly affected by HIV, at least have lost one parent. And so those kids are usually kind of pushed aside in the school system. And so one of the ways that this happens is through camps. Camps are one of the only ways that kids get enrichment. And normally those camps are only open to the kids who score really, really well on those test scores. So kids at the top of their class. So here we are in this country, Botswana, that has incredible wildlife. I mean, Botswana has an overpopulation of elephants. Do you get that? Like, you're driving on these northern roads and you actually have to like learn how to drive in case an elephant might charge, because there are herds of elephants in Botswana. But you have all these kids that have never left their village and haven't really had the opportunity to like see this wildlife, or really to be encouraged to be curious, right? To be creative and to think about their world. So it's really only open to these students who score well. So Wilson had this idea. He thought that maybe he could reach those kids that had been cast aside through art. His idea was maybe they're not bad students, maybe they're just artistic types, right? So we started to formulate this idea that maybe we could start a camp in one of the wildlife reserves. But this camp would not be open to these students with really high test scores. It would be open to kids in detention and kids who are failing out of school. so teachers, counselors could identify them. So we started to partner with teachers, local principals, artists other than Wilson, wildlife game guides, and Peace Corps volunteers in schools to make this happen. And we called it Bodira Hatsi, the Expressive Arts Camp. So that was the idea. So backing up just a little bit, I want to give you a tiny bit of history and context of why Peace Corps was in Botswana in the first place. This all started back in 2002 when HIV/AIDS hit really hard. Back then, life expectancy was only about 38. That would put me at old age. So now it's changed quite a bit. Like the rate of HIV is still very high, but people are living longer with it. So if you look at population graphs, that's why the rate is still very high, because people are living longer. But this kind of gives you a little bit of a background. I'll let Jake show the video.
With your commitment to freedom, to the advancement of the interests of people be far-reaching.
She immersed herself in our situation.
I'm the only child of my family who gone to the university. To a large extent,
Mohai,
thanks to
the first president of Botswana that invited Peace Corps in.
Is what will change the world.
Hopefully you'll be able to hear it at that point, maybe.
In the early days, from 1966 to about the mid-70s, the communities were surprised by
Can you hear that a little bit now?
Who were living with them.
Oh, there's subtitles. Great.
And wearing ordinary clothes, who seem to be interested even in what they are eating, what they are wearing, what they want to do, and why they want to do it. So many of them, personal friends, but also colleagues, working, thinking, writing, in all sectors of the economy and society. In the third year of my presidency, my country was one of the most seriously affected by HIV and AIDS. We were overwhelmed, and that's the time when I asked President Bush for help with Peace Corps again. When they came, it was an outright emergency. They really worked very hard, and they really helped. We were succeeded. We were able to reduce the death rates and prevention of mother-to-child transmission. By the time I retired from president, only 4% of children born to HIV-positive mothers became positive. And that's because of the prevention work, which in fact is now the specialty of Peace Corps. We saw them help us at an hour of need, an hour of need.
Of why Peace Corps was in Botswana in the first place. So this is me. That's what brought me to Botswana. And I told you that my Peace Corps job was analyzing HIV data, right, for the Ministry of Health. But I didn't tell you what we found. What we found was that gender-based violence, especially violence against women, was the leading cause of HIV in Botswana. There's a lot of political and historical reasons for that I won't get into. But it was mostly 9 to 12-year-old girls in relationships with 50 to 60-year-old guys. They were buying their school fees, their cell phones, things like that, things that seem huge as a 9-year-old girl and make you feel trapped in a relationship, right? So that discovery really opened up my service to work with other community partners, especially our local chief, first woman chief of Botswana, and a survivor of gender-based violence on these kind of issues. And so we worked in kind of two areas. The first is hope. So those of you here who have ever been a 9-year-old girl, it's hard to imagine what would motivate you to be in a relationship like that, right? Except for maybe a lack of hope, like being able to buy your own cell phone at some point in the future, or pay your own school fees. Your life just seems hopeless a little bit. And so we started working on helping 9 to 12-year-old girls get a leg up in school and work on job skills. So my husband's a computer engineer, And so he worked a lot on like building computer skills with these young girls who pick it up really quickly. That's true of young kids everywhere around the world, right? Computer skills kind of come to them. Literacy club, after school programs, things like that, anything to give them a leg up in school. And then the other kind of facet that we were working on was healthy relationships with boys and with youth. So we're talking about respect and accountability and dating with our youth groups, right? Teaching consent from a young age, basically what Wilson was doing on the bus. And so I'm a monitoring and evaluation person, and it was neat to see actual documented outcomes from this type of work, that hope, those job skills, those girls doing better in school was actually getting them out of these relationships, which was really cool to see. So the mission and goals of Peace Corps are really simple. The first two involve this cultural exchange, right? And this is actually harder than you might think. It's not just about like holidays and sharing food with another culture, right? Many Americans think of like Africa as all one place, right? Versus like, here's this one country that's incredibly diverse. We've got 11 different languages and all kinds of different people groups, and we've got desert and oasis, and we've got this delta, and it's complicated, right? But the flip side is also true. So many bets want to think of America as Disneyland and LA and New York, and that's it, you know? So you can bet that my Riley County 4-H upbringing, raising bison on the Flint Hills as a little girl, that didn't fit the stereotype, right? Like I'm a normal American. I know a lot of Americans, been to a lot of states, but my experience was different than what they expected. And maybe actually more similar to a Botswana upbringing than if I had grown up in LA. So that's actually harder than you might think. And then the last one is just about helping in specific jobs where we're invited into like these capacity building positions under local leadership. These are the sectors where they serve. So I really encourage you to think about your major, but also think about the ways that you are well-rounded. If you were involved in 4-H like I was, or if you're involved in clubs, or you study abroad, or you're involved with your church, or you do missions, or you do Engineers Without Borders, it prepares you well for this cross-sectoral work. So you'll notice that I was actually in health, was where my job was, but I did a lot of youth work, and I was doing a lot of education. I was in schools doing English training. I was even tutoring trigonometry at one point. Go figure, right? There's a lot of cross-sectoral work. So being well-rounded helps. So that's the basics of Peace Corps. But that's not the story, actually, that I want to share with you when I talk about the effects on local people. Because the most profound effect is really not going to be what I did, but what local people did, what I was able to encourage through relationships. So I think it's really about the relationships that you make, the connections that I help to foster, so that local people can do so much more profound work than I ever could. That's what capacity building means, right? To build up local people's ability to do their job better, rather than making it about me. So that brings me back to Wilson. This is him, wearing a shirt this time, at the Bodirahatsi camp, sharing about the responsibility of men to respect themselves and women. So what I had the kids actually take a bunch of pictures of the camp, because I didn't want you to get a sense of like my imperialist view of what was happening, but what they saw from the camp. So here's just a couple of pictures. I think these boys were listening to we had a lot of like healthy relationships and life skills talks and stuff, but this one was actually about circumcision. So they're doing circumcision with boys this age for, they don't have the technology to do it to infants yet in Botswana, and it's actually helping to decrease HIV/AIDS. So the boys are learning about the procedure. There was a giant paper mache. I felt like the picture of that probably wasn't appropriate, but yeah, they were mesmerized. And this was true for almost every talk. Like, you would kind of expect us to have behavioral issues at this camp, right? Because a lot of these kids came out of detention, but we didn't. And I credit that partly with a lot of adults being involved. There was a lot of one-on-one attention. So like local teachers, local community leaders, there were a ton of adults involved that could really give attention to these kids. But also there wasn't a lot of structure. They were pretty free to play and create and be expressive. So yeah, that was really cool. There was a lot of dancing. There was even like DJ equipment, and the kids were doing that. Tons of musical instruments, a lot of music. I think this is a selfie, but you can kind of see like the gallery of artwork that's starting to form behind them. Mask making was one of the object lessons on like trust and communication. Make sure your partner can still breathe as you're doing this. They saw a ton of animals, like a lot of animals. We even had a seamstress come in, and some of the kids were doing some sewing. We did some quilting, which was really amazing. So why capacity building? Why community-based? Basically, like, why not do it yourself? Why not have Peace Corps volunteers come in and run these camps? Why do you teach Wilson how to write grants? Why do you teach local community health nurses to engage and talk about healthy relationships? Or why connect local wildlife biologists with local teachers? Why not just go in and run camps? All of this to say, what impact does global service have on local communities? This is such a complicated question, right? Cross-cultural service can do a lot of unintentional harm, actually. Patterns of inequality, dependency, imperialism have been reproduced by global service if we're not careful. It's inadvertent, it's not intended, right? But I do think that searching for a way forward, focusing on work that is capacity building, that's grassroots, that's community-based, is important. So we don't make assumptions based on our really American views of what we think people need. And what's going on. Sometimes we have no idea what's going on. Sometimes I felt like the longer I lived in Botswana, the less I knew what was going on, even though my language was better. And there are layers, right? We'll always kind of be outsiders. So I think the impact really can be profound if we really are building up communities to solve problems together, connecting teachers and nurses and wildlife biologists, rangers to serve kids, especially kids who haven't had the chance maybe to be honest about their HIV positive statuses, and to deal with that kind of loss and to move forward. So more than that kind of impact, it's the impact of relationships, I think, like the ones I formed with Wilson and that he formed with my counterpart, Mama Chaba, and with the teachers, and especially with these kids. To have local leaders, believing in them, I think that's really profound. So that's my story, and I really, really appreciate you guys letting me share with you today. Thanks.
All right, so we've got about 15 more minutes before we're done. We've covered a lot of material today, and so we're now going to open up for questions. We do have a panel, and so I'll be passing around this microphone, and then I'll leave this one here. So if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand, and I can bring the microphone to you. And then at the end, if you want more information on either Engineers Without Borders, they have set up a table in the back. Peace Corps has an iPad where you can sign up for more information. And if you want to learn about education abroad, here are the Guzeks and Kathy Brockway and Becky DeGrief, and they will be happy to answer any questions.
I was wondering if Fred Guzek could speak to some of the activities that we will be doing when we travel in the spring with the two courses that I mentioned.
We have no tickets bought, so we don't know what the hell we're doing. No, to be honest, the spring study abroad tour is intended to visit the Porsche and Mercedes museums in Stuttgart, Germany, and the Geneva Motor Show in Geneva, Switzerland, and the archaeological dig under the St. Peter Cathedral in Geneva, and the little town so high up in the mountains at the base of the Matterhorn that there are no cars, so that we can contrast the visits to a couple of automobile companies, proprietary museums, and a world-class auto show We can contrast that with an area where the cars are not the dominant method of transportation. And it's there's a project management course and an intercultural communication course that will travel together to those places. And so the intercultural communication piece is about learning how to interpret and communicate with people whose culture is not your own. And the project management course, we teach a toolkit for managing projects in the first half of the semester. We go to Europe to get some inspiration, and then we come back and students do individual project plans for international projects of their choice. So I hope that touches. I will tell one other story. One of our colleagues, a fellow faculty member, asked her class recently if anyone had traveled with this group in the past, and there was one student who had, and so the instructor said, "Why don't you tell the rest of the class what to expect?" And the student said, "If you travel with them, they'll make sure you don't die, and you will eat."
Thank you.
Awesome.
First of all, I want to say thank you for your humanitarian efforts, all of you. But this is directed to the two students. I assume at some point you'll graduate from school and you'll move on in life. How do you feel this will change your opportunity for job searches or employment? Or how do you actually see this becoming a part of the fabric of your life as an adult non-student in the United States?
I think your, international efforts are grand, but what kind of opportunities are available on a local level for students to participate in their local community? Especially Salina, if anybody could answer that.
Yeah, I don't know much about Salina, but we've been really trying to make an impact on the Manhattan community. So we've been opening up to them giving us what they need, telling us what they need, and we hope that we can allocate resources for them. Like the Manhattan Emergency Shelter has just recently contacted us, and we try to make it to where general members can volunteer on Saturdays, and so they can learn more about the need in their own community, and that also gives them kind of a base for learning responsibility before they move on to those bigger international projects. So we try our best to learn about our communities that we're living in our own hometowns, and then see how we can help with those needs.
I'd like to talk with you just a little bit about your question. Currently, I teach here in tech writing, and my classes this semester are working on volunteerism. And one of the most fascinating things that I have learned, I'm relatively new to this town, are the enormous numbers of opportunities to volunteer and affect change in Saline County. You can start with United Way. They have a site called the Hub, and it literally is interactive. You set up a profile, and organizations all over this county, it could be making macaroni and cheese for the holidays, or it could be working at the Arts Center or the library or whatever. You just literally can go and cherry pick what you would like to do in this community. They have a tremendous website there that you can go and look at. It's amazing, really, for a town this size.
I would add too for Peace Corps. I mean, we are the only the international branch. So if you wanted to serve in the United States, you'd have to apply for AmeriCorps or one of those. But at the same time, being engaged in your community now is what would qualify for you for this type of work. Whether you want to do engineers as a career, whether you want to do Peace Corps, whether you want to work for the U.S. State Department or work in international development, or even just for your community, being engaged with nonprofit organizations and with community service here in town is really how you get started. So I look at applications all the time from K-State students who are applying to Peace Corps, and a lot of times it's the students who are focused, who are really passionate about either hunger in their community, or they're really passionate about homelessness, or they're passionate about tutoring and that kind of thing, that get into Peace Corps, because you can tell that there's something deeper that's driving them to do service. It's not just this, kind of willy-nilly philanthropy or that kind of thing, but there's a drivenness behind it. So all of those things beyond study abroad definitely help if this is something you're interested in.
Hi, I want to thank you all for traveling to Salina and sharing this with us today. I actually am a former Peace Corps volunteer who served in Guatemala in 1980 and 81. And so I have conversations with students about Peace Corps a lot. And students will come and say, well, I'm thinking about quitting school and going to Peace Corps. What do you think? And I always say, well, I couldn't have learned in Peace Corps what I learned in college, and I couldn't have learned in college what I learned in Peace Corps. So they're both valuable. But I know a lot of things have changed. The international communities have changed, and the process has changed. And most of our students have had to go off to class. But I'm interested in knowing, for those students who come up and say, well, how does the process work, and what are the requirements, and how do they decide where you go? Do you get to choose? Because I know what the process was 30 years ago, but I don't know now.
Yeah, it's actually changed since I applied in 2013. But yeah, don't quit college to join the Peace Corps. They won't take you. You need a college degree. But there's an application process that's online at peacecorps.gov, and I'm the K-State rep. So if you want to contact me or contact another RPCV, Return Peace Corps volunteer, like your professor there, they can help you with it. But you've got two choices. You can either apply to a specific job, so all those job postings are up there at peacecorps.gov, and kind of tell them, with flexibility, okay, I want to be a food security volunteer in Vanuatu, but I'm open to other islands in the Pacific, or I'm open to other food security jobs anywhere in the world. Or you still have the option to apply, like probably you and I both did, where you apply where needed most, where you basically give them a very comprehensive resume. They know everything about you, and then countries basically get to bid on you to decide, because they do want you to fit into that primary assignment that you're applying for, but because they know there will be all this cross-sectoral work, you might show up in a community where, that's your primary assignment, but there are a lot of people that don't have the resources to support a Peace Corps volunteer that want your help with other things. And so they really are looking for well-rounded people. But if you do want to apply, I recommend you get on that website and start your application about 9 months in advance, because it takes a while to get through your medical and security clearance and that kind of thing. They accept about 1 in 10 applicants right now.
Awesome. We have time for just one more question before we let you go.
And I have a Peace Corps question about resources that you mentioned. I noticed in your booklet that when you finish, you're compensated at about $8,000. Can you talk about how you are compensated during the 2 years and speak a little bit to the 8,000?
Sure. So Peace Corps is volunteer in the sense that you sign up for it and you're not paid like an American salary, but they do take care of you while you're there. So they pay for you to get there. They pay for about 3 months of training where you're just working on language and on-the-job training in the country, but not at your site. They pay you a living stipend that is commensurate with what other people in your community would be living on. So you'll always be able to eat. And then the organization that you work for provides your housing. So that's why there's a lot of variety. Like in Botswana, I lived in a tile house with, tile floor. We had running water when the water was on about once a month. We had electricity. We had Wi-Fi. Just across the border in Zambia, all volunteers live in a mud hut with a thatched roof because that's what their communities provide them. So there's a lot of variety. All your medical care is covered while you're there. They contract out to local doctors, and there's also a Peace Corps doctor. All your like safety and security, your travel to and from trainings, back to the United States if there's an emergency. And then they get you back to the United States, give you a readjustment allowance, which is what you're referring to. And then there's a lot of career help as well. So there are a lot of jobs that give you NCE status, non-competitive eligibility, as if you're a veteran. They consider you first. And then other jobs that are only open to return Peace Corps volunteers. Most of them tend to be in DC and those areas, but you would be surprised, like the Topeka Social Security Administration was only hiring return Peace Corps volunteers at one point. So there's a lot of jobs available to you, but they want to make sure that you have some time to get back on your feet and readjust. It's a hard readjustment back to the United States. So they want to make sure you have time and money to get through that period. Does that answer your question? What about it? Like, why is it hard? Well, I think it's probably different for every Peace Corps volunteer, so maybe you have different answers to this. But for me, it was a cultural shock. Like, I hadn't been into a Walmart. I've been back in the United States for a year. I had not been into a Walmart until a couple weeks ago. It was just that hard to like see the overconsumption and that kind of thing. I got very used to the amount of water that I used because the water was off in the village, so that was hard. So I just felt weird in every social situation for a long time. And I missed people terribly, and I think that, you know, a lot of times people think of it as like a short-term service, but like, you know, you're there for a significant amount of time at your life, and every Peace Corps volunteer has a counterpart, and so usually that ends up being your best friend, you know. I actually had 4 counterparts during my service because 3 of them died, because that's the reality in Botswana. And so like I had grieved a lot while I was there, but that's not really on people's radar. Like they don't think of like, oh yeah, you go overseas and then like you're good friends with people who die. But you know, it's a longer term kind of thing. So yeah, it's an adjustment back to America.
Couldn't ride in a car with the radio on. There was just too much stimulation after not being in that environment for so long.
It's lonely. Like America, even if you're around other Americans, like if you are on the highway, you look at other cars and it's like one driver in each car. Whereas Botswana has like there's a hitchhiking system. You don't drive from one place to another without filling up your car with people who pay you the same, as a bus fare, and then you go on to the next. And so you're always with people, whether they're people you know or not. So I got lonely when I drove. Like it just felt weird to be alone in a car, and I was like, these fossil fuels. So yeah, it's just different.
Awesome. So it's 1 o'clock. So I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. If we could just have one more round of applause for all of our speakers. I know the CAF was ending their Thanksgiving meal at 1, and so if they still have pie, we should probably all go grab a slice before we leave.